All right, another one of these reviews. This one is for Lord of Emperors, the second in Guy Gavriel Kay's Sarantine Mosaic. And if you saw the earlier video, I absolutely loved the first book, Sailing to Sarantium. It was, I think, one of my favorite books, not only that I've read this year, but it's like one of my favorite I've read in 10 years even. It's just so perfect. It's slowly paced, slow burn, perfectly written prose. It's absolutely great. And you're building all these amazing characters. And what I disliked about this book, Lord of Emperors, is when I directly compare it to Sailing to Sarantium, because it is obviously the second and final of the two books. And I think it dropped the ball on a few things. I don't know how long it took to, if Guy Gavriel Kay wrote them back to back or what, but it kind of feels as if, honestly, he finished this book and finished the series, but wanted to write a different book. That's what it kind of felt like. Because when I did like the book, I really enjoyed it. I rated it 4 out of 5 stars. The first one I rated 5 on Goodreads, but it dropped the ball when it came to characters and character development. Because as I said, you built up all these great characters. You have this super interesting Crispin, and he's a mosaicist. Crazy. I love artisanal main characters who are actually doing their craft, and it's a big part of the story, right? Yeah, cool. The kid's a blacksmith, and he's gonna take on the world, but you don't see him smithing anything for the rest of the series, right? Maybe once or twice, right? But it doesn't come up. But I love it when they are, they use their skills, and that's kind of their job, right? They're not some kind of warrior. They're not mosaicist turned warrior. They're mosaicist. And that's what he does in the first one, and it's great. It's huge to the plot, it's huge to his character, and you learn more about him by the things that he does. You get the Emperor, Valerius II. You get, it's so interesting how he came to power, what kind of guy he is, what kind of relationship he has with the Empress, who is as interesting, if not more, right? Who is an actress who came from nothing, from basic slavery, came from nothing and is now the Empress, right? Like, that's a crazy storyline there for her. You get Vargos, who's the hired hand, who there's so much more to him, but you don't explore him that much. You get Cassia, right? Who goes from, free woman to slave to then being freed. What is she gonna do with her life, right? You get all of these things. The alchemist from the first, you get all of these things. And obviously, the second book is about ending those storylines. And what we got instead in the beginning, for the first 50% of the book, actually, mostly was kind of the storylines for those characters that we built up. They're now all in Sarantium. And it kind of doesn't build on them too much. You don't get many character moments that are important. Nothing huge happens for them, really. And you don't get too much actual face time with them as much as you'd hope. What you get more is a new character entirely. Rustam, the physician from the East. He comes from the Arab world and the Persian world, but obviously fantastical. And he is a solid character, really good character. He is interesting, he is multi-layered, he is all of these things, but he is new. That's why I say it feels like a new story wanted to be written and could have been written. And if he was the main character in it, it would have been great. But his inclusion and the depths that we go with this character, it felt like we took away from all the other characters that we've built up. And that's not okay for me to give this book as high of marks as I'd want. And it's not just that, oh, I need these characters in the beginning. I really do, but since this is the last book, we are ending the storylines for all these characters that we've built up in the first one, that have been built up, and that we're waiting to see what happens. And you've got all these emotional, you have desires for their storylines to build, peak, and then, just like any other story, conclude the way that is in some way, understandable and cathartic and all of those things. And we did get that. We did get that with a lot of the characters, right? But it wasn't as sweet or as meaningful or as impactful as it could have been, I believe, if we would have continued with all of these characters and continued building them, instead of having kind of a hiatus and then spending the last 50% on them, which is kind of what we did. And it even comes with Rustum, the physician character, who was a huge main character for this book, not in the first book again. Like where he ends up, his conclusion is actually really short. It only takes a few paragraphs where it's like, and then this happened, and then he's now out of the story. And now we've got the last 10% to finalize our other characters. And you're like, oh my gosh. The writing, the prose was fantastic, just as the first one. The characters themselves, the one from the first one and Rustum himself, were all excellent, right? But again, not as impactful as I'd wanted to be. There are so many quotes that you can get from this book, and I did highlight them because it's in my Kindle, that are just so meaningful and are so deep, and you realize that the author, Guy Gavriel Kay, just understands. He understands and can put to words things that most others can't. Just like the deepness of human experience is just wildly accurately put to page, and makes you sit back and think. A lot of times in this book and the first book, which are the only two GGK books I've read so far, I've had to sit back and just think how this, because it hits you deep, and then you think, okay, how has this affected my life, right? And then you go through a slew of memories, right? And that might leave you there for another 10-15 minutes while you just stare off and continue drinking your coffee, but you don't read, you just remember. And that's just magical. That's magic of prose, honestly, because you can get the same points across written by, let's say, I don't want to throw shade, actually, I don't want to do that, but let's say written by an author who does not have, and which are most, who does not have the capability as this author, Guy Gavriel Kay. And you could be like, oh yeah, sick, yeah, that's good, and then you continue moving on. But just the eloquence, and he uses the specific words that are perfect for that sentence, and the paragraphs and all of this. And I can't say enough. These books make you feel, and it's not just, oh, the character died, oh, I feel bad. It's even little things, even throwaway moments with throwaway characters you never meet again, and you have a weird existential moment about your life. That is the power of prose, especially Guy Gavriel Kay's prose. It's magical. So, high marks. Obviously, I really like the world. It felt like, and this was then confirmed for me later when I looked into it, but there's portions where you're like, okay, is this building up to something else? And it builds into another story, Lions of Al Rasan, I think is the book, and I think I might read that next. But you're like, okay, that's interesting, but I feel like we're also getting away from the main story. I wanted to say though, as prose, because that's really my only big negative about the book, is that it is unsatisfying in that way. You really want to be with Crispin, you really want to be with Cassia Olin. But and that was the first 56%. I looked at the Kindle. 56% is where the book started to absolutely fly by, to take off. That's when we now are rewarded. It's not like it was a painful experience the whole time. It was actually pretty smooth. It was nice. But the buildup from the first book is starting to pay off now, in huge ways, on that 56% mark all the way to the end. And it took me 4 to 5 days to read the first 50% of this book. It's not a huge book. It's 500 pages, something like that, 600 pages. So it took me quite a bit, actually, comparatively. And that's what I'm saying. It's slow. It's not as well paced or plotted as the first one. But once you get there, it's off to the races, literally, in a lot of cases, because you get a chariot race that is one of the most visceral experiences I've had while reading. I haven't had readings like that and such visceral experiences as when I was reading a Red Rising or something like that, where it's full-blown action adventure. You are seeing, feeling everything, and it goes by fast, but it's action. And the characters are so well built that you can see them, you can hear them, right? And you can smell them even sometimes. You're like, okay, that's absolutely wild. And I'm not a person to have a huge imagination like that where I can easily do that. It's not the case. I can really tell an author's skill when I can actually do that. And in this book, it's been like that the entire time. But when there's a huge chariot race where crazy things happen, and you can hear the crowd, you can see the chariots going around, you can You know, you're switching from multiple point of view characters as they watch the race from multiple places. And then like things are happening under the stands, and it's just absolutely wild. And it was a top 10 kind of scene from any book. I haven't done that ever, but I immediately knew that, oh, I need one of those, like in my mind at least, like a scene, an action scene or a moment, right? Like I compare it to, in the first book, there was the scene when Crispin goes finally to get in front of the Emperor, and you have that scene where Crispin talks to the Emperor the strategos or strategos, I don't know Greek, but like that. You talk to the Emperor, Empress, you talk to all these people, and you just have this amazing scene where they're all talking to each other, and it's as nail biting as this chariot race in the first one, or in the second book. And it was just that. It was nail biting, it was intense, it was, you know, jump out of your seat worthy a lot of times, and I could see and feel everything. And that's happening with a prose style like GGK, where it's eloquent, it's beautiful, but it's also fast paced. You know, it's the perfect prose. Like, it is the absolute perfect prose. With Pierce, he has a simpler prose. He has a much simpler prose. Action is great. It's biting. It's quick. It's great, right? But it doesn't have that sophistication or eloquence of a GGK. And GGK accomplishes the same thing, but it's better because of it, because of that skill with his prose. You have to read it to understand it. It is, from what I understand, not to everyone's taste. Not everyone likes GGK, but he is, like, everything that he's written, I will read. Like, I know that now. It's that great, especially since people are saying, like, I think Joshua, I don't even know what to call him, but Red Fury Books, great channel, one of my favorites, absolute favorites. He is reading the books at the same time as I am, coincidentally, and he has read 3 other books from GGK that he loves more than the Sailing to Sarantine, even, is what he put on Goodreads. And that blows my mind, and I'm going to be knocking those out now. I tried to read Tigana years and years ago, but I didn't really try. I have it, but I didn't even attempt to read it, but at one point I knew it was a thing, and I bought it. So I have to do that again. I'm thinking I'm going to do Lions, though, first. But anyways, you now know how I feel. The last 50% is if it was all like that, this would have been better than Sailing to Sarantine. But since it wasn't, I have to give it a lower score for sure. It's just not as good of a book. It doesn't have a great plot line, great storytelling as the first one. Yes, there were amazing scenes, and the conclusion was really solid for all the characters. However, Rustum the physician took away from the book, I'd say. He definitely took away from the book. Yeah. Let's say I gave it on, I put my longer review, or maybe not longer, just written review on Goodreads, and I put it as like an 8.7, 8.8, somewhere around there, right? 8.7, 8.8. While there's a whole 10 points, or I guess a point plus, however the rating is, right? If you do, where you put the decimal, but it's an entire point better or worse than the first book. And that's a tier that goes from a 5-star book, like S tier book, to an A book, really. Yeah, so I don't know. I guess I'm adding some GGK next on my list, but I also have been thinking about getting into Brandon Sanderson again. I read the first 3 books years and years ago, and I was, lukewarm on it, but I was also on a submarine, so maybe I'll give it another try. I know Theo from Rekindled Reader is giving it a shot for the first time, and he's absolutely loving it. And him and I have similar tastes, it seems. So maybe I'll give it a shot. I am in a hotel. I am in Greensboro, North Carolina now, which will be my final resting place, let's say, to rest from my travels and stay here. So this is the hotel. Hopefully my background, it will in the next couple months kind of stay in one thing once I get my apartment, but after this I'm going to another place and then there. So hopefully get there. My shirt is absolutely great, just got it. Pacific Northwest when I was in Washington, got it, and yeah, absolutely banger. I love this shirt so far. Yeah, who knows what I'm gonna read next. I'm reading the last of the Raymond Chandler, Philip Marlowe, The Trouble Is My Business, something like that, and it's going meh. So that'll be the review after this at least timeline-wise. But on to the next book. We'll see what happens next.